Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. We have a GC race in our hands at La Vuelta a España. Remco Evenepoel has not cracked, but he's faltered just enough to give his rivals some hope. I'll be wrapping up week 2 of the race, as well as the Simac Ladies Tour, the opening stage of the Tour of Britain and the Maryland Classic. Plus, we'll be speaking to Jay Vine about his phenomenal Vuelta so far. Let's start with La Vuelta then, and this time last week I was talking about whether or not Remco would crack, as we've seen him do on a number of occasions in the past. There were no signs of that in the first part of last week. He took his first Grand Tour victory by annihilating everybody else on Tuesday's time trial, and then on stage 12 only Mas, Roglič and Ayuso were able to stick with him as he set his characteristic metronomic pace at the end of the summit finish. However, that stage was the second day where not everything had gone to plan for the young Belgian. 24 hours earlier, he lost his teammate Julian Alaphilippe after the world champion crashed on an innocuous corner, dislocating his shoulder, and then Evenepoel himself crashed on stage 12 in an equally straightforward-looking corner, if that's not an oxymoron. Now, it left him bruised and scarred, but without any broken bones, he seemed unaffected. 48 hours after that, though, Evenepoel showed his first signs of weakness, whilst Primož Roglič showed the first signs that he might be getting onto top form. The Jumbo-Visma rider attacked on the steepest part of Sierra de la Pandera, and for a few fleeting moments, it looked as though Evenepoel would concede minutes rather than seconds. That, though, I have to say, was the moment Evenepoel impressed me more than any of his outrageously dominant performances. In limiting his losses that day and staying mentally strong all the way to the line, it felt like a coming of age, a new level of maturity for him. He'd lost some of his lead, but retained most of it. Now, the big question was whether that was simply a bad day or a sign of worse things to come. With the Queen stage just 24 hours later, finishing on the slopes of Sierra Nevada and its 2,500 metres of altitude, many feared the worst. But despite Jumbo-Visma and Primož Roglič throwing everything they had at him at the foot of that climb, Evenepoel was every bit their match. Now, a tactical masterclass by Quick-Step meant that his teammate Lewis Vervaeke was able to set the pace for his leader for a few kilometres later on that climb. In the end, after attacks from Mas and later Roglič, the Belgian would concede just 36 seconds to the Spaniard and 15 seconds to the Slovenian. So this is how things look with 15 stages down and 6 to go. Evenepoel leading Roglič by 1 minute and 34, Mas by 2:01. Ayuso and Rodriguez switched positions yesterday and are now 4th and 5th respectively. Miguel Angel Lopez is just 8 seconds behind Rodriguez in 6th, Almeida in 7th, whilst Thymen Arensman's brilliant stage victory on the day saw him move up 3 places to 8th. The Australian pairing of O'Connor and Hindley round out that top 10. Now, the good news for all neutral viewers is that the top 3 are now closer than they were a couple of days ago. The final week of the race is not as hard as it has been in some previous editions of La Vuelta. There's still ample opportunity for Roglič and Mas to attack, and plenty of stages which will pose some very tough terrain upon which Evenepoel and Quick-Step need to defend. So I would like to get your thoughts 1 week after I last asked you, who do you think will be in the red jersey of this race come Sunday's finale in Madrid? Let me know in the comment section just below this video. Back to Thymen Arensman though, and what a performance that was by the young Dutchman. He went through a few tough days according to Matt Winston, his sports director, in the second week, so that was quite the comeback yesterday. That marked his second career win and bodes very well for his future, which for the next few years will be with Ineos Grenadiers. Mads Pedersen's hard-earned victory on stage 13 was less of a surprise than Arensman's, but equally as impressive, I would say. Considering how long the Dane has been in top form for this year, it's remarkable that he's showing little signs of fatigue. He goes into the final rest day with a whopping 173-point advantage in the green jersey competition, and he stands a good chance of getting a second stage victory on stage 16 tomorrow. The other stages last week were won by Caden Groves of Team Bike Exchange, who took the biggest win of his career back on Wednesday, and Richard Carapaz, who set about doing Richard Carapaz exploits on stages 12 and 14, taking the wins there. A seriously impressive turnaround from the first week that he had at the race. And one thing that we can all be thankful for over the last 2 stages of La Vuelta was that there were no COVID positives within the peloton, at least none reported. Things were looking rather precarious, to say the least, at the start of the week, with riders such as Simon Yates and Pavel Sivakov forced to withdraw whilst in the top 10 on GC. It looked like it could be a case of last man standing wins the race. Let's keep our fingers crossed that the remaining riders stay healthy through to Madrid and, of course, beyond. The other big story that has rumbled on this week is that of UCI points and that relegation battle. Davide Cimolai of Team Cofidis said to reporters that his teammate Brian Coquard would head home early from La Vuelta in order to compete in smaller one-day races that offer more UCI points. Now that, thankfully, so far at least, has turned out not to be true. But then yesterday it was reported on the AS website in Spain that Alejandro Valverde is being prevented from competing at his final World Championships in order to remain in Europe and concentrate on picking up points for Movistar. Which seems ridiculous. But this is the position a number of teams have found themselves in, and so they've been forced to take this sort of action. And now the interesting point about the Worlds in particular is that if you score UCI points there, they do count towards your trade team's tally. So Valverde being kept at home is simply about cutting down on travel time and leaving him fresher to pick up more results in Europe over that time period. But it begs the question as to whether trade team allegiances might have an impact on the way that the World Championships are ridden. Now let's say, for example, that a rider from Lotto Soudal and a rider from Arkea Samsic are on the same national team. Is one of them really going to put themselves on the line to help the other get a big result, knowing that it could negatively impact the trade team that pays him? Now, I haven't had a chance to look at the various countries' roster to see if that's a potential scenario, but in theory, it could be, which seems ridiculous. I certainly don't think the UCI can have thought about how this relegation system might have impacted the biggest races in the world at the end of this 3-year period. I'm sure this, unfortunately, is not the last we'll be talking about this subject, unfortunately. Anyway, back to La Vuelta, and yesterday Jay Vine extended his lead in the King of the Mountains competition, taking maximum points on the first 2 climbs of the day before going on to pick up a few more at the finish by taking 4th on the stage. He now leads that competition by 29 points over Richard Carapaz, and Conor Dunn caught up with the Australian to find out what's clicked for him at this race.
Jay, thanks for joining us. You've been so close to winning in Europe. What has clicked for you at this race?
I think it's just practice, like I've said it multiple times before, but European racing is completely different to the amateur, but even the UCI stuff that I've done on the other side of the world. I think I had 10 days in Europe before I lined up for my first Grand Tour last year. And racing in a World Tour peloton is nothing. Like even the Sun Tour was my highest level before that in Australia. So I think it's practice. I've had a lot more racing days this year and a lot more targeted racing days as the leader of a team. And I've come to this race really well prepared and with no pressure on my shoulders either. So it's been, I think a Swiss cheese effect, basically.
Nice one. Well, it's definitely clicking for you now. 2 stage wins, you're in the Mountains jersey. But looking back to that first win, considering you won from the GC group, do you regret losing time deliberately?
No, not at all. Not one bit, actually. There's a reason why the top 3 or 4 teams in the world have the biggest budgets for GC. And that's because you need riders to be able to try and support you in the mountains. And, as a classic sprint-based team, we don't have the ability to get riders to help me in the back half of really, really tough stages, which is what you need. Besides all that, it's my second Grand Tour. Like, I wasn't interested in doing GC, especially because I didn't deliberately lose time on stage 1. We gave everything in the time trial, and we still finished over a minute down. So, yes, I didn't go full in the next time trial, but even if I went full in the individual time trial, I think Remco takes minute 50 out of me, no problems. So to be 2 minutes 50, let's just say I lose some time on some sprint stages, so 3 minutes. 3 minutes down across essentially 3 stages that you can't fight for GC for that. So, yeah, I think it's been much more worthwhile learning a bunch of other different things, like how to win from a GC group, how to win from a breakaway, how to be smart in a breakaway, testing my limits at altitude, no pressure, and also trying to help get Tim to a stage win in sprints as well. Doing those jobs, I think it's been a really good tour for me.
Seems like sticking to your plan is definitely paying off. Before I leave you though, if you could win either one more stage win or keep the KOM jersey, what would it be?
Oh, I think it's no doubt that it would be the KOM jersey. But I think the way the points are loaded for the rest of the tour, if I was to win another stage, I lock up the Mountains jersey by default, I think. But also, if I completely target the KOM jersey, it sort of goes along with going well in a stage as well. So stage 20 is a massive one. So, yeah, it could all get turned on its head the day before Madrid. So I think we are fully focused on just getting the Mountains jersey, and anything that comes on top of that is a byproduct.
Thank you to Jay and to Conor, and a reminder that registration is open for the Zwift Academy. So if you think you've got what it takes to go pro, or you just fancy getting a bit fitter over the next few weeks, make sure you get involved. On to the Simac Ladies Tour now, and I will start by apologising that we didn't deliver the live coverage that I promised you last week. Unfortunately, there was a technical issue with getting the host feed onto our platforms, leaving it very stuttery, and after working with them on it, we unfortunately couldn't resolve it, which is a real shame. The race itself saw Lorena Wiebes continue a season that is nothing short of incredible. She won the sprint finishes on the opening 2 stages with lengths to spare on everybody else. And they marked her 19th and 20th wins of a season to that point, out of just 43 days of racing. And she could have won the following day too, but instead she decided to spread the love and lead out her Team DSM teammate Charlotte Kuhl. The results, a 1-2 on the stage for the team and a second season win for Kuhl. On stage 4, Wiebes' sprint was so dominant, she had a 1-second gap over everybody who finished behind her, but she didn't win. 14 seconds in front of her was Team Jumbo-Visma's Rianne Marcus, who'd attacked with a little over 6 kilometres remaining. Going into the individual time trial on the penultimate day, Wiebes had a GC lead of 20 seconds, and 5th place on that day was enough to remain in the leader's jersey. That stage had been won by Audrey Cordon-Ragot, but she was 7 seconds short of topping the GC standings. On the 6th and final stage, Wiebes once again won the sprint, but this time it was only for 3rd place, as a late attack by Misha Bredeveld and Eleonora Gasparini stuck to the line, with the 22-year-old Dutch woman taking the 2nd pro win of her career and her first at World Tour level. Finishing 3rd was more than enough though for Wiebes to wrap up the GC. She is just a winning machine at this point in time. Meanwhile, weather conditions in Scotland for the first stage of the Tour of Britain were not exactly ideal for bike racing. High winds and severe rain delayed the start of TV coverage, and once live pictures did start, we saw just how biblical the rain was at times. A 5-man group went up the road early and swept up the intermediate points en route to Aberdeen, and at a point it did look like it might be in with a chance of getting a stage victory. However, with the Ineos chase being aided by Israel Premier Tech, they were brought back with a couple of kilometres to go. It was a much larger group that contested the summit finish than I think we had expected, probably down to a fierce headwind. Omar Freile was the first to kick after a strong lead out from his teammate Magnus Sheffield, but coming past him ahead of the line was Corbin Strong of Israel Premier Tech. A world champion on the track and prominent throughout last year's UCI Track Champions League, that marked his first ever pro win on the road. The Tour of Britain will continue tomorrow and conclude on Sunday with a lap around the Isle of Wight. Saturday's penultimate stage, though, takes the rides along the Jurassic coastline and over many of my former training roads. That one could be, I think, tougher than it looks on paper, and I'm expecting at least a couple of depressing Strava notifications sometime that evening. Every stage of that race is live in all GCN Plus territories. Meanwhile, the Vuelta a España will resume tomorrow for stage 16 and what looks like it could be a bunch sprint. Thursday's stage offers more scope for some change on the general classification, but the big one this week comes on Saturday. 181 kilometres, 5 climbs, 3 of them first category, one of which comes near the start and one of which is at the finish. It looks like one of those days where we could get some really big surprises on the general classification. So if you're only going to tune into one stage of La Vuelta this week, make it that one. Stage 20, live from 11:15 BST, 12:15 CEST, should I say, this coming Saturday. Territory restrictions do apply. Beyond those 2 stage races, we also have the welcome return of the Grand Prix of Quebec and Montreal. Due to COVID, they've not been able to organise those events since 2019, but they'll be back with a bang this year as they've attracted some of the biggest stars in cycling, many of whom will be using them as their final preparation for the World Championships. Van Aert, Pogačar, Laporte, Mohoric, Matthews, Girmay, Bardet and Sagan are amongst the many big names competing. Both races will be live from flag drop to finish line, and you'll be able to watch them on GCN Plus in all territories except for Canada. Meanwhile, the Women's World Tour resumes this week with the Ceratizit Challenge by La Vuelta, which is extended to 5 days this year. We're expecting a sprint on the first and final days of the race, but the GC looks set to be shaped on day 2 around Colindres. The start list isn't particularly clear as I record this, but you can expect some of the world's top names to be competing there. There are a few territory restrictions on that one, so please check if it's available to watch where you are right now. Just before I move on, a quick note to say that we have some special t-shirts and a hoodie to celebrate the current racing going on in Spain, including the one that I'm wearing right now. Head over to shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com if you'd like to take a look at that collection. Right, I'm going to hand back over to Conor Dunn now. I'm recording this race news show whilst the Maryland Classic is just underway. So here is an update on what happened at the biggest UCI race in the USA.
Cheers, Dan. The 196-kilometre route presented a similar parcours to that of the Belgium Classic. It, of course, took place over the pond in Baltimore. It would be Sepp van Mark who would emerge victorious in a thrilling 4-man sprint after the attacks flew in the closing stages. The quartet of Van Mark, Scoyens of Trek Segafredo, Nicholas Sakowski of Human Powered Health, and Nielsen Paulus of EF Education Easy Post managed to escape with 3 of the 4 finishing circuits remaining. Coming into the final lap of those circuits, it would be clear that the winner would come from that group, and Van Mark took a valuable win for Israel Premier Tech, besting the other 3 with a strong sprint. That was also the first time that a field of this calibre has returned to the USA since the Amgen Tour California in 2019, which was won by Tadej Pogačar. Great to see US Pro Racing back at this level, Dan.
Thank you once again to Conor. In other news, rumours are already circulating as to the routes of the Giro d'Italia and the Tour de France next year, and 2 particularly famous climbs look set to be included. At the Giro d'Italia, it looks likely that the incredibly steep slopes of Monte Zoncolan will make a return after 1-year absence, whilst at the Tour de France, the Puy de Dôme returns after a 34-year absence. For the past few decades, it was apparently unfeasible to include that climb due to the relative lack of space at the top. It's near Clermont-Ferrand in the Auvergne region of France. However, Christian Prudhomme appears to have found a workaround for those restrictions, which is brilliant news. I can't wait already. Transfer rumours now, and I shall finish with a few big ones on the women's side. The biggest transfer announcement was that of Liane Lippert, who's going to move from Team DSM and over to Movistar on a 3-year contract starting next year. With Van Vleuten retiring at the end of next year, the team is obviously having to think about their next phase. And whilst it's nigh on impossible to replace Van Vleuten, Lippert is clearly one of the most talented climbers in the world right now. Staying with DSM, though, is the former junior world champion Megan Jastrab, who extends with the team through to the end of 2025. Team SD Works have strengthened their team for the next 2 seasons with the addition of 2 Dutch riders, Misha Bredevold, who won that stage at the Simac Ladies Tour, and Marcus Femke, both of whom move over from Park Hotel Valkenburg. Brodie Chapman revealed some time ago that she'd be leaving FTJ at the end of this year, but last week we found out her destination, Trek Segafredo. Chapman was particularly strong during the Spring Classics this year, and in Trek Segafredo, she's joining a squad that's already particularly strong in the one-day races. On the men's side, Jumbo-Visma confirmed 3 more signings for 2023. Established pros Jan Tratnik and Attila Valter, plus 22-year-old Thomas Gloag, who recently won a stage of the Tour de l'Avenir. And finally, Wout Poels has extended with Bahrain Victorious in a contract that will run through to the end of 2024. That is all for this week's GCN Racing News Show, but I hope to see you again tomorrow for Stage 16 of La Vuelta. Goodbye for now, though.